Okay, recording has started. Welcome to the March 19th, 2026 Division of Adult Education monthly webinar. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of the session. No other recording of this session is allowed. That includes any kind of AI note-taking that you might have. So if you do have that, please turn that off. Okay, so today's agenda, I have a couple very general updates and reminders. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania's NRS performance, how we did compared to the formal targets that we were expected to hit this year, for 24-25. And then we're going to look at some trends in Pennsylvania's performance, NRS, and kind of how we've been doing as a state, but then more importantly, how we've been doing compared to other states and how our ranking has changed to kind of give you the context of why we have the additional emphasis on performance moving forward. And then we're going to look at year-to-date data. I did a similar webinar last year on the same kind of date, this Thursday. And so we're going to look at 25-26 year-to-date data and kind of see where we are compared to last year. And then at that point, I will stop this recording. And because the rest of the webinar is going to focus on some of the new Section 243 IELCE kind of options and guidance that we will have moving forward for our Section 243 IELCE grants. So those of you who aren't interested in that can hop off. And I will stop recording for the first part, and then I'll start recording for the Section 243 IELCE section so that there will be two different recordings for today's webinar. Okay, just a couple really quick kind of reminders, requests, updates type things. The first is on the adult intake form. For those of you who use it on paper. So there is an item that is reason for participation, and there are multiple options. But in eData, the data entry person can only enter one option. So as the advisors have been monitoring programs, we've noticed cases in which a student had selected multiple reasons for participation, and then the data entry person kind of had to guess which one was the one to enter. So when you're working with your students, again, you shouldn't just be handing them the intake form to fill out without supporting. You should be helping them fill it out, providing guidance. Please ask them to just select their main reason for participation. Or if they happen to select multiple ones, ask them maybe to circle the one that's most important to them, just so that there's that agreement between what's on the form and what's in eData. The second bullet, this came to my attention a couple weeks ago. We had someone email us and said that they had a student who was trying to register to take the online proctoring test and was informed by GED Testing Service that they'd already used all of 4 of their discount codes. So as a reminder, the discount code for GED, an individual can use it 4 times, right? That's it. For HiSET, it's 5 because there are 5 subtests. When a person is taking the test using online proctoring, they have to make sure their computer, everything is up and running on their computer before the online proctoring scheduled test. If things aren't ready, or if you don't meet the requirements, that testing is canceled, and that's considered a no-show. And we are charged for no-shows. So a no-show is a use of the discount code. So please make sure, and that would account to, like, if you have a student who is going to take it at a testing site, and they just don't bother to show up, and they don't do the cancellation or the reschedule within the time frame established by GED, or HiSET. Yeah, that's a no-show. We're charged for it. That counts as a use of the discount code. So please just make your students aware of that. And if you happen to be helping them, do the online proctoring by having a computer at your site and setting up a space. Please make sure everything is set up and ready for them so that they don't lose a use. No, it is okay. I think there was just a question. Could somebody read the question to me?
Sure. The question is, does that limit mean just one for each section of the GED? It is not 4 per section, correct?
Yes, it is. It's 4, period. So if a student chooses to use all 4 of their options to try and pass the math test, then they've used all 4 options. They can only use the discount code 4 times. And then transportation support. This question has come up, especially because a lot of programs are choosing to use some of their incentive funds to support students to address transportation issues so that they can attend classes. And there are just a couple things I want to clarify. Um, it Whatever resource you give them to support their transportation has to be for program participation use, right? So I believe there's some programs that have used local funds to buy gas cards. The problem with the gas card is that when you fill up the tank of gas, you can't really say this is only for coming to class because that person is using the car for a lot of other things. Or like a monthly bus pass. Again, like that bus pass can be used for a lot of things other than attending classes, and we're just not allowed to use the funds for that. However, if you can, if you buy a daily bus pass that you give to the student and they use that on the day that they come to class, that's fine. We've heard about, if there's ways that you can cover parking for the class, the day on the class, that if you're covering the cost of parking when they come to class and you're reimbursing them for that, or you're giving them a token that they can use when they leave the parking garage, things like that are fine. If they take an Uber and you cover the cost of the Uber to the class, things like that, where you can clearly say, yes, this student used, we paid for this student to attend the class. That's fine. It just can't be kind of a general thing that the student could use for any purposes. As a reminder, that goes in 2160. It is barrier support, and it therefore is also impacted by that 10% cap on 2160. I believe there was another question about the discount codes.
Yeah, the question is, can a student use 4 GED test codes and then, as necessary, use 5 HiSET codes?
Yes. I would certainly hope, however, that you are working with your student to take the tests only when they are likely to pass. But yes, they could take 4 GED and 5 HiSET. So this is kind of a reminder. This has actually come up several times in the last couple of weeks. Questions that our high school equivalency office has received, because parents want their kids to stop attending school and do adult education instead. So, as a reminder, these are the 2 statutory eligibility requirements related to age and secondary school attendance. This is not me being mean. This is what is written in the statute. So, WIOA says eligible individuals must be 16 and not enrolled or required to be enrolled in secondary education. Okay, 16 and not enrolled or required to be enrolled. Pennsylvania has compulsory school age of 18. 16 and 17-year-olds are required to be enrolled in school. There would have very few exceptions in which they're not. So if you're going to serve 16 or 17-year-olds, you have to be, with your federal funds, you have to be very careful that they are not required to be enrolled in school. The state statute says 17. So you cannot serve 16-year-olds with your state funds, and they can't be enrolled in school. Now, it doesn't say anything about being required to be enrolled. So if you have some kind of documentation that they have officially been released from the requirement to attend high school, not quite sure how the school districts are doing that, but if you have something, you can serve them, but you need to be really careful. I have been working with other folks here at PDE to better understand high school equivalency versus compulsory school age. And I need to let you know that while there are rare cases in which 16 and 17-year-olds can be given permission to take the GED or HiSET test, notice I say take the test, not attend adult education. Take the test. There are certain conditions under which someone can take the test. Passing the high school equivalency test does not release them from compulsory school age. We know that's crazy. But I asked about that. Our legal office, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, everybody looked into it. And currently there is nothing that would exempt someone who has been awarded or has passed a high school equivalency test. That does not exempt them from compulsory school age. So those are just some things to know. The other thing I want to let you know, I said there are certain times when a 16 or a 17-year-old might be eligible to take the test. Again, they can't participate in your program to help them prepare, but they can take the test. It's court ordered. They have a letter from a post-secondary institution saying that the post-secondary institution will enroll them upon passage of the high school equivalency test. Military recruiter, employer saying the high school equivalency is necessary, not beneficial, but necessary for employment. And then like the head of a school, like a Job Corps, youth detention center, etc. Nowhere in there is adult education program. So we have recently gotten a couple letters from adult ed programs saying, hey, we're requesting an age waiver for this student to participate in our program, or we would like this student to be able to take the GED test. You are not able to submit one of those letters. So, those are just some clarifying things around 16 and 17-year-olds. We understand the frustration, right? You have 16 and 17-year-olds who are not engaged in school. They're not attending, they're truant, they want to come to your programs. You can't serve them under our grants. That's the other thing I'll say. You can't serve them under our grants. If you have other funding, if you have private funding, and you can serve that student, and that student is not touched by any of our grant funds, you're not assessing them, you're with our assessments, you're not using any of our resources to support that. If you have a tutor who's willing to work with that student, that's different, right? We don't control that, but they cannot be served with our grant funds. Unless you have some very clear documentation from the school district. Okay, so those are the updates and reminders. NRS performance. Several times last fall, last summer, I talked to you about how for the first time, the federal U.S. Department of Education OCTAE was going to assess states. And that assessment was very specific term here, meaning that they were going to hold states accountable to meet the negotiated targets that we had established in the state plan. And for October 2025, they were going to be assessing us on the measurable skill gain and the second quarter after exit. The assessment process is fairly complicated because it involves kind of three different levels of performance. There's a negotiated level, which is the number that the state office has negotiated with Octave that is included in the state plan. Then there's an adjusted level. What that means is Octave has developed a statistical adjustment model, which I will not try to explain to you. I have seen multiple webinars on it and it's very confusing. But basically what they do is they look at the conditions in the state during the year that we're being assessed on, or the period we're being assessed on. They look at the students that we're serving, the demographics, their NRS levels, et cetera. And then using the statistical adjustment model, they may say, okay, actually, we think your negotiated level should have actually been a little higher and the adjusted level is now this, or we think it might be a little bit lower and here's your new adjusted level, right? So here's the negotiated target and that wasn't high enough. Now we, through this Octave, through the statistical adjustment model, are now saying you actually have to hit a higher amount or hit a lower amount. And then the actual level is the level that we report in the national reporting system based on our calculations. So this is this table on this slide is taken directly from a spreadsheet that was sent to state directors by Octave. The two bullets I have added. So just for context, meeting, quote unquote, meeting the adjusted level, right? So we negotiated a target, then, and here you can see our negotiated level for measurable skill gains was 37%, and our negotiated level for employment in the second quarter after exit was 47.5%. Then Octave took the statistical adjustment model and doing all their calculations, they said, you know what? Based on your student body and all these other things, we think that we're going to increase your negotiated level. And we think that the adjusted level that you should meet, you should have met, because we find this out after the fact, is now 39.8. And this is what we are held accountable for. For employment, and so you can see here, basically the statistical adjustment model increased our target, whereas for employment, it actually decreased ours down to 41%. So we established this, the 47.5% was established back when the economy was stronger. The statistical adjustment model kind of took into account the economic and employment factors in Pennsylvania over what was our actual reporting period for this. And so they said, you know what? 47.5% was too high for given the circumstances. So your adjusted level was 41%. This actual level is what we reported. So our actual measurable skill gain was 41.2%. Our actual employment was 40.7%. And in order to be considered to have met this adjusted level of target, our actual has to be at least 90% of the adjusted level. And so you can see in both cases, we met our targets. So we won't have to do a corrective action plan next year. And this looks great. We're like, woohoo, 103.5% of what was expected, 99.2%. But what I do want to point out is that there were 37 states or territories or DC whose indicator score was higher than ours. So they exceeded their adjusted level by even more than we did. And there were 38 whose employment was higher than ours. I believe I saw a hand up. Somebody have a question?
That was a mistake. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this slide was for 24-25, right? This is how we did. So, you know, our actual level 41.2, 40. The next several slides are going to show you the trends in our performance under WIOA. So this is 2016 through 2024. This data is taken from spreadsheets that Octane makes available to state directors that show quartiles, right? It shows all of the 57 states, Washington, D.C., territories, and outlying areas, right? So there's the 50 states, Washington, D.C., and then there are the 6 territories and outlying areas, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Guam, Palau, Northern Marianas, and American Samoa. So in total, there are 57 entities that get ranked. And they break them into quartiles, the 4th quartile being the top quartile. And then the 1st quartile is the bottom one. You know, so there's a lot of data on this slide. I'm not going to read all of it. But what I want to show you, that this is covering our MSG trends from 2016 through 2024. So, in 2016, our ABE MSG was 44.66%, ESL 47.5%, overall MSG 45.63%. In the rankings of all 57 states, territories, and DC, in 2016, we ranked 25th in ABE, 20th in ESL, and 24th overall. And as you can see in all 3 areas, our MSG was higher than the national median. Remember that at that time, MSG was almost exclusively EFL gains based on pre-post testing. The only other real options we had were passing the high school equivalency test, right? Not the subtest. That was just introduced a couple of years ago. They had to pass the full test or exiting adult education and enrolling in post-secondary education within the program year, right? So Octane had much narrower options for showing measurable skill gain. And we were still, at 45% overall as a state. Went down a little bit, 17 and 18. I think that those were years that we had some new assessments, especially the TABE, but not significant changes. However, we went from being in the 3rd quartile, in other words, the upper half of the states, to the 2nd quartile. So we were now in the bottom half. And so you can see we went from 25 to 33 to 34. And this is ranking from 1 being the best to 57 being the worst. So the higher the number, the lower of the rank. As you can see, we dropped from 20th to 31st, 24th to 35th. We'll kind of skip 2019 and 2020 because those were kind of crazy years. And numbers were really crazy. Since kind of the end of the pandemic, we've been seeing increases in general in our measurable skill gains. But given what's happening with our ranking and with the national median, you can see that while we are improving, most other states and territories are improving more quickly, and we are dropping in ranking. So it's great that we met our measurable skill gain targets. We've seen significant improvement over the years, went from 32% up to 41%. A lot of that has to do with the introduction of the high school equivalency subtest as an EFL gain. I believe that was in 23 here, so that's part of that significant gain. But, we are in the bottom quartile for ABE and overall, and we're into the next to the bottom quartile for ESL. So this is a little bit of context for you about why we're really focusing on the data, and we're going to be focusing on measurable skill gain improvements. Now, interestingly, we hear frustration on the part of adult education programs that there are employment outcomes because you're not job developers. We also know that many of our students are not necessarily interested in employment, or the employment that they enter into will not show up in the wage data that we use for data matching. They might be self-employed, they might be employed in a family, federal employment, military, all those things, they don't show up in the wage data. But interestingly, it is in the employment areas that Pennsylvania has been consistently in the top half. So as you can see, and 2016 is not here because we did not report on employment for the 15-16 program year. So you can see we're generally doing pretty well around employment. Again, we'll need to keep doing better because we are expected as a state to show continuous improvement. And I think some of our programs weren't really entering Social Security numbers for students at all. And so we're starting to make changes there and get that data in. So I think we're doing okay here. We don't want to rest on our laurels, but in general, as compared to other states, we're doing pretty well in the employment outcomes. And then the last one that we'll look at for trends is credential attainment. As a reminder, credential attainment has two portions to it. It is secondary credential, so earning the high school equivalency credential, and post-secondary credentials. Obviously, for adult education Title II, the secondary credential is by far the most common. As a reminder, the cohort that we have to report on for federal reporting purposes is students who are at ABE levels 5 or 6, either as a pre-test or a post-test, regardless of whether or not they actually take the full test, right? If they exit the program, and they were at any time during their enrollment in ABE level 5 or 6, they are included in the cohort. The other thing is, even if they pass the high school equivalency test and they earn the credential, we can only include them as a success if they are also employed or enrolled in post-secondary education or training within a year after exiting. Again, that is not my choice. That is in statute. That's not even OCTAE. OCTAE didn't impose that. That is a requirement that is in the statute. As you can see, we were doing pretty well, but now we're not doing as well. So this is another area that we might want to look at improving. Are there any questions, hands up, anything, any further clarification?
Amanda,
Yep.
there's a question in the chat. How close are we to the states above or below us? Are the states close to us with 0.5%, double-digit percentages, or somewhere in between?
I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't have the overall spread quartiles in front of me. I think the document that we have, so I can share the quartile spreadsheets with you. I asked Octay. So if that's something that you would like to see, please email your advisor and I can send that out to people who are interested in seeing those. It's a lot of data and it's a lot of numbers, so I don't want to send it out to everyone because you might just look at it and say, ah. But if it's something you might be interested in seeing, please let your advisor know and I can share that with you. But I can't answer that off the top of my head, sorry. Okay, so that's kind of context um, for how we've been doing historically. And now I want to say, okay, well, where are we right now in this program year moving forward? Kind of look, how do we compare to last year? What do we need to do to make sure that we don't not just do as well as we did last year, but do even better because our targets are going to keep increasing. So now I'm going to shift to where things stand. Now, this snapshot is only looking at EFL gains based on pre-post testing, right? So this does not include the EFL gain for by passing a high school equivalency subtest. I know some of you have been entering that data in eData for your own purposes, but it's not consistent. And I just didn't have the capacity to do any kind of formal data matching to see, which ones to add here. So this is purely looking at pre-post testing. As a reminder, 10 years ago, by pre-post testing, we were at about 44, 45% of MSG with just pre-post testing. So just have that as a little bit of context. And the reality is the majority of our students do show measurable skill gain by EFL gain through pre-post testing. So this applies to the majority of our students. So the all contracts row I took from the Access template. Michael and Steve has done a great job of updating the NRS reports, and they're working to update them even more. But I am able to create a table 4 and table 4B that covers all contracts that unduplicated. So far this year, across all of our grants, all of our programs, unduplicated, you've enrolled 11,786 students. And I pulled data yesterday evening. Those are enrolled adults with valid pretests in the system. There are 80 adults in eData as of last night who had 12 or more hours who do not have a valid pretest in the system. That either means they don't have a pretest at all or the pretest is more than 30 days after their start date. One agency accounts for 35 of those. I'm not going to say who, but that's a problem because we have to report outcomes for those people. So those people are automatically negative for us because they don't have an entry level, right? So we have to stick them somewhere, but we can't show an EFL gain with them because they don't have a valid test. The other thing is, of the 11,786 students in this list, 190 of them, which is only about 1.6%, had an entry level of ABE level 6. So of course we know students ABE level 6 cannot show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing, but they can, they show it in other ways. So of the 11,786 students, 98.4% of them could potentially show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing. So we look at this, of the 11,786, just under 5,000 have been administered at least one post-test, right? So 42% have been post-tested. Of those, 2,700 had an EFL gain. So we're at overall as a state for EFL gains, we're at 22.1%. And the other thing I like to look at is table 4B because that's of the people who were pre-post test. So of these people, what percent is this? And as a state, we're at about 54.5%. Right. So of the people who have been post tested, a little over half have shown an EFL gain. And then these are just the breakdowns by the various grants. The Adult Basic Education grant is unduplicated, so this gets rid of any shared students across grants. These three, there's probably some duplication in these numbers, although not significantly. So as you can see, there's some progress. So this table shows March 18th, 2026 snapshot data with the March 17th, 2025 snapshot data that I presented last March. The gray shaded rows are the 2026 data. The numbers that I have highlighted in green are 2026 numbers that are higher than last year's numbers. The red numbers are lower. As you can see, while programs except for family literacy have post-tested a slightly higher percentage of students as they had at the same time last year, except for Section 243, the EFL gain in Table 4B have dropped. So while you've post-tested a slightly higher percentage in adult ed, Section 243, and tutoring, a smaller percentage of those people have actually shown an EFL gain. So again, just something to kind of look at to see where things are. The bottom row in this table, which is in light blue, has our final EFL gain and table 4B data from program year 24-25. When we showed 41.2% measurable skill gain. Okay, and you're like, wait a second, you just said 41.2%. What's this 34.7, right? 41.2 is overall measurable skill gain. So that includes people who showed EFL gain by pre-post testing, people who showed EFL gain by passing a high school equivalency subtest, by transitioning to post-secondary education or training, or earning the high school equivalency credential, and then the few people we have who do it through options 4 and 5, which are related to IET and workplace literacy classes. So as you can see, I mean, the other options for EFL gains have made a substantial improvement for us, but I would still like our EFL gain number to get to continue to improve. So last year's table, so the year prior, sorry, I'm correcting myself because I realized I did not update the numbers in my notes. For 23-24, our table 4B number was 60%. So our final 24-25 number was 63%. So we saw an improvement there. Of the students who got post-tested, we had a higher percentage who were actually showed an EFL gain. So, we need to be closer to these numbers, making progress. But this is just this is where we are. Different agencies looking at this, your numbers are going to look very different, right? This is statewide. So maybe sitting down looking at where are you successful, where are you not successful. Those of you who have larger adult basic education, more students working towards passing the high school equivalency, you might have lower numbers here because you're not you have more students who are showing an EFL gain based on passing the high school equivalency subtest. So this is really just kind of a snapshot for you to see this is where we are as a state. How does it compare to what you're doing, and what can you do to help us as a state to increase our performance so that we can meet the targets for next year? Okay, this is my last slide of the non-Section 243 things. So I'm willing to take any questions that people have.
Amanda, there's two, actually three now.
Mhm.
First question is GED attainment counts for an MSG regardless of level, correct?
Yes, passing the high school equivalency subtest or earning the high school credential counts as MSG. Yes, that's the ABE level 5 and 6 is only related to the cohort for credential attainment. That is not a requirement for measurable skill gain by passing the high school equivalency test or by passing a subtest, correct?
Second question, do you have data on how many agencies have achieved 100% enrollment at this point in the program year compared to last year?
Not off the top of my head, no. And I don't know that I have I might be able to figure that out, but I don't have it off the top of my head right now, no.
Okay. And what do you attribute the drop in EFL gain to? The standardized test, all updated recently, correct?
I don't attribute it to anything. I'm just pointing it out. Um, I don't know. I don't know what it is. That's why we're asking programs to look at their own data. Right? You know your student population, you know what's happening with pre-post testing, you know that. I don't have the details. So could it be increased rigor of the tests? It could be. It could be other things that are happening locally that I don't know about. Sorry, I'm probably not a very satisfactory answer, but that really is why we want you to look at your data. I do want to point out though that other states, are showing other states are doing better than we are. I think there might have been one more question, Mary, or no?
No, that was all the questions.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and stop recording now so that this is one recording, and then I'm going to start recording again, and I hope it works.